Penguin Random House Audio presents Mouse Now. Selected writing. Edited by Hilary Chute. Read for you by Fred Berman. Note to readers. This audiobook includes a supplementary PDF. Introduction. Mouse Now. Hilary Chute. 1. In the fall of 2011, I was interviewing Art Spiegelman on stage in a ticketed event at the 92nd Street Y in New York. I asked him, very earnestly, about a musing he had jotted down in a notebook in the early 1970s, which was around the time he started making comics stories about the Holocaust that would eventually lead to creating his 2-volume masterpiece, Mouse, A Survivor's Tale. Maybe Western civilization has forfeited any right to literature with a big L, Spiegelman had written. Maybe Goethe and Mozart were not the patron saints of Germany. Maybe vulgar, semi-literate, unsubtle comic books are an appropriate form for speaking of the unspeakable. 40 years later, on stage, Art quipped back at me, "For one thing, the unspeakable gets spoken within 10 minutes, by me if nobody else." This is, I should note, the same event in which he got up in the middle of our interview and went outside to smoke a cigarette, leaving me facing an empty chair and a sold-out crowd. Through its creativity and innovation, Spiegelman's Mouse, coming up on a 4-decade anniversary, shifted how people talk about history, trauma, ethnic and racial persecution, and comics. Mouse has profoundly changed cultures of expression in the United States and all over the world. First serialized in the biannual Raw magazine beginning in 1980 and published as 2 book volumes in 1986 and 1991 respectively, it has been translated into almost 40 languages, and Spiegelman is one of our most famous living cartoonists, as well as a globally recognized public intellectual. As the German critic Kurt Scheel writes in his 1989 review of Mouse 1, referring to the celebrated Todesfuge, Death Fugue, poet and one-time labor camp inmate Paul Celan, Celan and Spiegelman are to be mentioned together because both the cartoonist and the poet invented a language for their subject that did not exist before. See Mauschwitz in this volume, published here in English for the first time. Spiegelman's approach to speaking the unspeakable, the language he invented, as Scheel suggests, is both verbal and visual. Comics, with its peculiar distilled word and image grammar. Spiegelman, who spent 13 years making Mouse, not only modeled definitively that, in fact, comics could be remarkably sophisticated, literate, and subtle, but he also blew open about 1,000 other cliches and pieties about art and representation, particularly in the expression of the darkest aspects of human history and the testimony that results from it. Today, the pressure Mouse places on some of those pieties is itself under pressure, as the book's recent banning by a Tennessee county school board, which cited examples of its supposed impropriety, reveals. Unfolding in black line art, Mouse presents at least 2 stories. The testimony of Spiegelman's father, Władek Spiegelman, a Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust and emigrated to the United States in 1951 with his wife, Anya, also a survivor, and their toddler, Art, and the story of the cartoonist's son as an adult, soliciting his father's testimony in order to understand and visualize his experience on the page for readers. Anya Spiegelman died by suicide in 1968, when Art was 20, and her absence is a vexing, animating force of the narrative. Mouse toggles back and forth between the 1930s and 1940s in Poland and Germany, during which Spiegelman's parents fight for their lives against the murderous Nazi regime. Both ultimately wind up imprisoned in the Auschwitz death camp complex, and the 1970s and 1980s in New York City and the Catskills, during which Spiegelman interviews Władek, a difficult and often frustrating figure to his son. "No way, I'd rather feel guilty," the Spiegelman character remarks when his wife asks in their Soho apartment if he is going to Queens at his father's request to help him fix a drain pipe. Mouse is a powerful story for many reasons, one of which is the propulsive structure of the book, in which readers, immersed in its pages, on one level know that Vladek survives. After all, Art, his post-war progeny, is its creator, but are also constantly and harrowingly in suspense as to how he can escape the succession of terrifying circumstances we witness with him. Readers wait with bated breath for the gap between present and past to close. Professor Brian Boyd's study on the origin of stories, evolution, cognition, and fiction, which offers an evolutionary explanation for supremely successful stories, opens with the line, "My first debt is to Art Spiegelman." Further, Mouse famously visually articulates its characters as animals throughout, a visual overlay that provides a level of abstraction hard to imagine being effective in any other medium aside from comics. While the characters who populate Mouse are all drawn with animal heads, and sometimes tails, this figuration is never remarked upon by them in the book, except in rare instances in which Spiegelman reflects as part of the narrative on his artistic choices. The characters understand themselves as human, but readers see Jews as mice, Nazis as cats, and Polish Gentiles as pigs, among other figurations. Americans are dogs. This animal metaphor, itself borrowed from Nazi propaganda and resignified, is further self-reflexively disrupted by the book itself over the course of its pages. Spiegelman had for some time in the 1980s imagined that he would self-publish Mouse with the raw books and graphics imprint that he and Françoise Mouly ran out of their living room, and then their basement. The couple co-founded and co-edited Raw magazine from 1980 to 1991, which offered shifting subtitles with each edition, such as The Graphics Magazine That Lost Its Faith in Nihilism. Spiegelman joked to interviewer Stanley Crouch in 1996 that working on a book was like having a long-term disease. To battle, I suppose. This comment also vividly illustrates how Spiegelman approaches the stakes of his work, which is existentially. I have rarely known anyone as seriously consumed by the act of creation as Art Spiegelman is, whether the project at hand is 1 page or 300 pages. But this dedication, particularly as Spiegelman came to Mouse from an avant-garde comics culture, driven by underground, independent publishing and distribution, was not matched by any expectation for commercial achievement. Spiegelman's 3-page 1972 comic story, Mouse, the seed for the longer work, analyzed in this volume by Joshua Brown and Marianne Hirsch, among others, published in the underground anthology Funny Aminals, the swapped letters are deliberate, was aesthetically and politically important, but didn't elicit much of a reaction. Spiegelman did not anticipate the enormous critical and commercial success Mouse would become, particularly after his struggle to find a publisher. Pantheon took it on only after already passing on it once, and Spiegelman had garnered dozens and dozens of rejection letters. A photograph of a thick spread of these appears in our collaborative interview-driven book, Meta Mouse, A Look Inside a Modern Classic, Mouse. Mouse was an immediate success, a sensation, to use Michiko Kakutani's phrase in her review of the second volume in the New York Times, even as some readers struggled with the perceived glibness of connecting comics and the Holocaust, and still others struggled to understand the valences of its animal conceit. For most readers, actual engagement with the book revealed its complexity above and beyond the cultural connotations of comics and its funny animal tradition. Crouch, in his interview with Spiegelman, notes, "The remarkable thing about it is when you pick up the book you say, this can't work," but he brings it off. As Hirsch suggests in an interview with Martha Kuhlman about Mouse scholarship, in an important formulation that underscores the book's barrier-breaking, Mouse teaches you how to read it. Some of the best strategies are taken from the text, Hirsch points out, rather than the other way around. Namely, the standard practice of approaching a book with interpretive frameworks in mind. Hirsch herself developed the now canonical concept of post-memory in relation to Mouse, as her essay in this volume explains. Previous frame.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?